There is a strange economy running beneath every intentional life, an economy not of coins, but of direction. At first glance, purpose seems like a private mood. It appears as an emotional intensity, a set of preferences, a story told to make sense of action. Look closer, and the private mood reveals itself as a physical pattern. Purpose organizes flows of energy and information in ways that reduce local entropy for a time. It concentrates potential into trajectories that last longer than random motion. In that sense, purpose is physics applied to living systems, a mechanism by which systems tilt probabilities toward ordered futures rather than toward the neutral drift of chance. Consider how directed systems appear in nature. A river carves a path because slight gradients are reinforced by flow. Over years, the erosion deepens the channel. The channel persists because the local conditions favor its continuation. Similarly, a purpose forms when small acts align with a direction and feedback reinforces that direction. The initial act is modest. The reinforcing dynamics are slow. The outcome is a channel that channels future acts. The physics language describes this as symmetry breaking, when a previously isotropic set of possibilities collapses into a preferred pattern. Purpose is a living example of symmetry breaking in moral time. The connection to thermodynamics is not metaphorical. Creating and sustaining a pattern requires dissipation. A mind that holds a purpose spends energy. The environment supplies resources, and the system exports entropy to maintain local order. In other words, purpose is an instance of organized dissipation. The fact that ordered structures require energy explains why purpose has costs. It explains why direction cannot be demanded for free. It also explains why the presence of constraints makes purpose possible. Constraints focus flow. They shape the geometry of possibility so that small inputs can generate persistent structures. This observation reframes many ordinary intuitions. The thought that purpose belongs solely to heroic projects or rare geniuses is incorrect. Even modest patterns of directed behavior are physical. A craftsman tending a single bench accumulates a field of order around that bench. A daily practice for a gardener shapes soil and yields, not because of grandeur, but because small directed inputs produce structural change over time. The physics of purpose reveals that scale is not essential to the reality of purposive organization. The relevant variable is not size. It is the presence of a stable channel that feedback reinforces. Feedback loops are therefore central. Positive feedback amplifies a chosen direction. Negative feedback regulates and refines. A robust, purposeful pattern combines both. It amplifies the actions that push the system toward desired states, while damping deviations that would scatter resources into waste. This interplay creates stability. It also creates the capacity for adaptation because when conditions change, the regulatory feedback can re-optimize the channel. Thus, practical purpose is not rigid determination. It is tuned reorientation. It bears resemblance to control theory, where set points are maintained through measurement, comparison, and correction. Measurement is the quiet hero of durable purpose. A system that cannot register its own state cannot correct course. Animals sense and learn because they measure relative outcomes. Human institutions do the same when they collect data and adjust policy. The physics analogy is clear. Sensors enable control. Without sensors, purpose dissolves into guesswork. The difference between mere intention and effective purpose often lies in whether the system includes reliable sensing mechanisms. Measurement converts possibilities into informative signals and opens the door for feedback to take hold. Information underwrites value judgments because it changes probabilities. A mind that receives timely information about the consequence of its actions updates beliefs and recalibrates behavior. This is why curiosity and careful observation appear as moral technologies. They increase the information flow that powers correction. The science of learning is therefore part of the physics of purpose. Learning algorithms succeed for the same reason that biological learning succeeds. They accumulate evidence and refine decision boundaries. Purposeful systems are knowledge-gathering systems with operational ends. Purpose also has an architecture of timescales. Some purposes are immediate. They are stabilizing moves that prevent collapse in the short run. Others are long horizon. They invest in structures that will produce payoffs decades hence. A resilient purposive regime includes multiple nested timescales because short-term stability is necessary to enable long-term discovery. This nesting mimics ecological succession where pioneer species prepare the ground for later, more durable communities. Purpose, therefore, is often a temporal stack, a layered set of objectives operating across nested intervals. The interplay of scale and time explains why institutions matter. Individuals can seed channels of order, but institutions amplify, protect, and transmit those channels across time and people. Institutions encode routines that approximate feedback loops. Legal systems, professional norms, and apprenticeship traditions stabilize practices that would otherwise be fragile. The physics of networks shows that connectivity can either dilute or concentrate directional flows. Well-designed institutions concentrate the right flows of information and resources to preserve purposeful channels. Poorly designed institutions shunt energy into wasteful loops that dissipate direction. Design choices are moral choices because they shape the geometry of possible futures. A road that connects two communities changes the probability that a market will prosper. A curriculum that emphasizes exploratory learning shifts the probability that innovation will occur in certain fields. Each design choice alters the landscape of gradients that purposeful systems can exploit. Architects of systems therefore bear responsibility. The recognition that purpose is partly an effect of design underscores a pragmatic ethic. Caring about purpose becomes a practice of tending environments so that direction can emerge and endure. Constraints deserve a closer look because they are often misunderstood as merely restrictive. In fact, constraints are enablers. They focus energy. They reduce the dimensionality of choice so that action becomes amplifiable. When a craftsperson sets clear constraints on materials and processes, the creative freedom within those constraints becomes fertile. The physics of constrained systems shows that phase transitions occur at the edge of feasible sets. Purpose frequently emerges at such edges where possibilities are compressed into actionable form. Organizational life is therefore a choreography of constraint setting and creative exploration within constrained subspaces. Stability is achieved through redundancy and repair. Physical systems that endure often include distributed backups and repair mechanisms. Biological organisms maintain tissues, replace cells, and engage healing processes. Similarly, social and personal purposes persist when they are supported by multiple strategies for repair. Redundancy prevents single points of failure. Repair practices correct drift. The moral dimension of repair is that it translates intention into longevity. Repair is the labor that keeps purposive channels coherent in the face of decay. The idea of drift is important. Unchecked systems tend toward entropy in the form of fragmentation, loss of coherence, and diffusion of intention. Drift is the natural tendency of trajectories to meander when feedback is weak. This is why purposive systems include correction processes that detect divergence and act. The physics of Brownian motion gives a metaphor. Without directed forces, particles wander. Purpose imposes directed forces. Those forces are often small, but when sustained, they overcome random fluctuations and produce net displacement. Another component of purposive physics is alignment across agents. Many important channels of order require coordination. Single minds can initiate patterns, yet complex societal goals typically depend on multiple actors aligning their micro decisions. Coordination problems are therefore central to large-scale purpose. Collective intentionality requires mechanisms like shared language, common incentives, ritual alignment, and institutional scaffolds. The study of collective action is thus part of the physics of purpose because it explains how local rules scale into global direction. Trust functions as a low-friction channel for coordination. When agents trust one another, information flows without costly verification steps. Trust reduces the thermodynamic friction of social systems. It lowers transaction costs and enables rapid reallocation of effort. Networks with high trust can more easily converge on shared purpose because they do not waste resources on repeated checks. The cultural cultivation of trust is therefore an engineering task that shapes the feasibility of ambitious collective projects. Purpose is not only external. Inner life reflects the same dynamics. A person whose inner architecture includes rituals for reflection, sensing, and repair demonstrates a microcosm of the larger design. Internal sensors, such as journaling and honest self-observation, act as measurement instruments. Small feedback loops like periodic review function as corrective thermostats. The physics analogy is again informative. A temperature control system samples the environment and adjusts outputs to maintain set points. Internal practices that stabilize values are the thermostats of purposive life. Choice of language matters because it alters the space of possibilities. Descriptions compress possibilities into manageable narratives. A well-chosen metaphor collapses complexity and clarifies direction. In cognitive terms, language acts as a map that highlights gradients and hides irrelevant noise. The act of naming an intention reduces degrees of freedom and makes action more amplifiable. The ritual of articulating goals thus functions as a preliminary constraint that enables a feedback loop to begin. There's a delicate balance between adaptation and commitment. Commitment biases a system toward a particular channel. Adaptation allows the channel to shift when metrics indicate that the context has changed. The elegant, purposive system is neither brittle nor vacillating. It holds a course long enough for structural change to accumulate, and it also contains mechanisms to update its trajectory when inputs demand it. This trade-off is visible in evolutionary processes where both robustness and evolvability coexist. Robustness preserves function. Evolvability allows innovation. Purposeful systems seek a middle state. The economics of purpose intersects with incentive design. When incentives align with long-term maintenance, purposeful channels thrive. Misaligned incentives produce pathological equilibria where short-term gain undermines durable order. Designing incentives that reward repair, learning, and horizon-spanning thinking is therefore an essential engineering problem. The political economy of incentives is often messy, but a thermodynamic view clarifies why investing in maintenance yields better energetic returns over time than pursuing flashy but dissipative spectacles. Ethical clarity arises naturally in this framework. If purpose is a mechanism that channels work toward coherent futures, then ethical attention must focus on who benefits and who carries costs in the creation and maintenance of those channels. Purposes that concentrate benefit while dispersing harm erode legitimacy. Purposes that build shared capabilities and distribute repair responsibilities create resilience. In other words, moral evaluation of purpose includes a systems-level audit of flows and distribution. Ethics becomes diagnostic and structural. Narrative is another stabilizer. Stories connect discrete moments into extended trajectories. A life that is narrated coherently becomes easier to direct because the narrative provides continuity. Societies use myths and histories to maintain institutions by linking current repair practices to ancestral meanings. The physics is simple. Coherent narratives reduce cognitive entropy by compressing states into meaningful sequences. When narrative and feedback align, purposeful channels persist across generations because meaning is inherited alongside resources and routines. The interaction between novel shocks and stable channels determines much of historical change. Shocks can destabilize purposive systems, yet they can also open new gradients for purposeful reconfiguration. In periods of shock, repair practices become visible and decisive. The capacity to repurpose existing channels into new alignments is a form of resilience. It requires modular institutional forms and flexible practices that permit recombination of existing elements to address emergent needs. Learning systems planted into social networks magnify purpose when they are able to transmit lessons through imitation. Cultural evolution depends on transmission fidelity and the selective retention of useful patterns. Purposive channels that are transmissible become cultural assets. They acquire the power of replicators because they carry execution templates. The physics of mimetic transmission thus complements the thermodynamic story. Information that is structured for transmission gains the advantage of longevity. At the scale of technology, the architecture of artifacts influences purposive probability. Tools that lower the cost of maintaining a channel dramatically change what purposes are feasible. A lever that reduces physical effort, a protocol that automates repetitive verification, a standard that reduces friction in cooperation, each expands the space of viable directions. The technological substrate thus co-authors purpose along with human intentions. Design choices in technology embed priorities. This is why values must be considered at the moment of design. Ultimately, the physics of purpose honors both humility and agency. Humility because the world imposes constraints. Agency because small, sustained inputs can produce large structural change when channeled well. The universe does not grant purpose for free. It rewards careful engineering of attention, measurement, repair, and coordination. The sober conclusion is optimistic in a particular shade. It is not the rhetoric of fate. It is the rational confidence that disciplined tending increases the probability that coherent, flourishing patterns will form and endure. Purpose is a landscape. It can be cultivated. It can be neglected. It can be redesigned. The central tools of that work are understanding of feedback, investment in sensing, commitment to repair, and the social practices that distribute maintenance as a common task. When these elements align, direction becomes sticky. The shape of future possibilities narrows toward desirable states and away from diffusion. The physical universe remains indifferent. Purpose is the way life refuses that indifference for a time. It is the practiced art of making matter and information bend toward meaningful ends.